Hi, and welcome to this special edition of The Right Stuff. I'm the Queen, Parker J. Thank you so much for joining me. I have been so excited to tell you about this wonderful anthology called A Time for Everything. It is a speculative fiction anthology that is inspired by the book of Ecclesiastes and edited by my good friend and creator, Ben Avery. Today, we're going to be talking to one of the writers of this wonderful anthology, and her name is Cathy McCrumb. Cathy, how you doing today?
Doing all right. Thanks for having me on.
And thank you for taking time to be here with me today. I am just so excited that you are a part of this project. We were so geeked when we found out about it. At least I was. And so we were able to take verses from the very famous poem of A Time for All Seasons in the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 3. And you had the verse, A Time to Love. But we'll get to that in just a few moments. I want people to know a little bit about you, Cathy. So go ahead and share yourself today.
Well, I write, I've written science fiction, and I write, in my own time, I write just about anything that I can. See I should tell you, the conclusion to my science fiction trilogy, Children of the Consortium, comes out next month in February of 2024. So I'm very excited about that.
Tell the people about your Children of the Consortium.
Well, let's see. I guess you could say there's a research station goes dark and the rescue mission goes wrong. And a young woman with no name, no family, no friends loses everything she has and discovers humanity for the first time. I think that about sums it up.
And when we find out about her, her name is simply Recorder.
Yeah, but yes, she's a recorder. Recorders are people who have been raised by the consortium to show no bias. They are kind of like notaries. But if you took a notary and you combined it with a Soviet political officer, that'd kind of be how people see see recorders. And none of them have names. They are supposed to be non-biased. And so any sort of name or something that connects them with something other than the consortium is frowned upon. So when she loses the technology that connects her to the consortium, she has the experiencing of emotions and developing connections with other people for the first time in her life.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg, dear listeners. So go ahead, if you want to check out Cathy's book, check it out today by going to Amazon.com or wherever books are sold. What's the title of the third book in the series?
The third book is Guardian.
And so that's going to be out next month. And we're looking at February 2024. So go ahead, if you want to catch up before the book comes out, make sure you go ahead and buy the other two in the trilogy today. Now, what was your history like when the opportunity to be a part of this anthology came to you?
I was off and on with my friend Robert Mullen. He wrote A Time to Die, which is the opposite of your story, Parker.
Oh yeah,
and he was like, "You've got to do this. We're going to be in the same anthology." And I'm like, "Okay, I'll do it." And so when I had the chance, I came up with a bunch of different ideas and ran over them with Ben, who's the editor, and he liked this particular one the best. And so yeah, I wanted to show love, not necessarily a romantic love, because there's all kinds of love. There's romantic love, and there's familial love, and there's friendship, and then there's, self-sacrificial love. And I wanted to address more than just one type.
I think with your story, A Time to Love, you really go into what it means to sacrifice for those that you love. And in your story, you really put feet on this idea. But before we go into that, I want people to know a little bit about the story itself. So go ahead, without giving away too many spoilers, tell us what A Time to Love is about.
There is a young couple, and their son stumbles through a time portal and disappears. And they have to make decisions as to how they can save him. This time portal, in the words of the story, quote, throws you back the weight of your years. So if you're 40 years old and you go through the time portal, you'll wind up 40 years ago. And then time resumes normally, and you're 40 years ago, 40 years old. And then to catch up with now, by the time you catch up with now, you'd be 80. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And it was a little trippy in the novel because I wasn't quite understanding what was happening, but we'll get to that in a second. Now, dear listener, one of the aspects of this anthology was that we had to add a speculative element and a time element. And your time element was being thrown back in time through the time portal. When you were putting this idea into your story, did you find you had difficulty with that?
The hardest thing about the time portal was the concept of being thrown back the weight of your years, and how do you put that into a story where the characters are not high tech. It's more of a low fantasy, although there are, mythical creatures in it and time travel through caves and portals. But for people who don't have that vocabulary that I would have about time travel, how do I make the concepts of the time travel show up in a relatable, believable way? And that was the hardest thing for me, I think, when I was writing it.
I think the element of some sort of time travel is what we, the authors of this particular collection, were drawn to. There isn't a person on the planet, I think, who doesn't often have the desire to go back in time and change something. But in your case, you actually show the danger of going back in time and not being able to change anything, but just to mitigate circumstances. So when this happens to one of our characters, what are some of the things that the people left behind have to consider?
Well, that was the tricky thing. Originally, I had thought about writing it from the father's point of view. But the thing that I think, one of the things that made it tricky for me is the waiting. Mm-hmm. And I think there's love on both the husband and the wife's side. How often do we as women, or as people who have people that have spouses or parents that go away and then come back? My husband was in the military, and I didn't have him. He wasn't deployed or anything like that. But there's that thought of, like, when they go away, will they come back and be the same person? How will they have changed? And so many of the people that I know who had husbands who've been deployed, it's not just will they come back, it's how will they come back? And so to me, it was very interesting to write it from Kara's point of view, because she's just waiting. And theoretically for her, her husband goes through the portal, and then he has to live the 24 years of his life all over again, and until he catches up with now. And I've drawn so many diagrams for this. It's just ridiculous to me. And the hand waving that I'm doing now isn't explaining anything to anybody who's listening. But as he goes through he has to live 24 years to catch up with what she's living in the present. And it might only be a week for her, but it's still waiting and it's still wondering, is he going to be the same person? Is he going to save our son? Will they come home? And that waiting and that wondering is what I tried to catch.
Another thing you catch too is the fact that when you sacrifice, it's not always noble. And what I mean by that is this. We sacrifice because that's our duty. And you use the example of someone who is in the military. And someone in the military, generally speaking, sacrifices their time with their family to have a greater goal. And his greater goal was to bring his son back through this portal. Now, dear listener, we're going to back up a little bit because you find this out relatively early in the story. Reese, her son, finds this time mirror. And I love the way you describe the mirror. I'm going to read it quickly. I love the way you describe it here. Let me see if I can go back to that real quick. I went all the way through the story here. Here we go. Okay. Hold on one second. Let me just push pause while I try to find it. So we're going to read the section, dear listener, about when her son Reese finds the mirror. Light gleams from the back of the cavern where a silent wall of water cascades from floor to uneven ceiling and ceiling to uneven floor, spiraling into the center like an eddy in a stream. Yet the water, if that is what it is, goes nowhere. There is no pool, no spray mists the air, no reflection glistens on dampened stone. White burns through the moving sheet, as candlelight does through a pane of frosted glass, but color tints the rushing surface. Neither sunrise touching the river's rapids, nor sunset glimmering on a field of newly fallen snow compares to the dancing hints of yellow, pink, blue, and purple. The wall of water shimmers, steals, allowing a brief reflection of the cavern, of Reese, of me. And that's just a description of the time portal there. I love the way you describe that, Cathy. It lets us know that you are thinking, and when you are thinking, you are thinking. Of course, the first thing I thought of was Stargate.
Of course it is. Yes.
Stargate really made an impact on a lot of us who are sci-fi fans because, again, who wouldn't go through the portal? Who wouldn't go? I think I would go under certain circumstances. And so what happened with Reese is that when he gets to the mirror, something happens to him. He reaches out and he does what to it?
Oh, any 4-year-old's going to touch it. And she's like, don't touch it.
Yeah.
And he's not going to listen because he's 4. Sorry, 4-year-olds. 4-year-olds who are offended by my words. I apologize, but I'm a mom of 5, and I know that 4-year-olds, you say, don't touch it. It's the first thing they're going to do.
Because now they have to touch it. I have to touch it because you told me not to. You told me not to touch it. If I did touch it, I wouldn't want to. If you told me so. So I like how you got this family here. This family is obviously very close. And then you did have the added drama of Harris dealing with loss of a child too. And that's something we learned pretty early in the story as well.
Yeah. It's I've lost pregnancies, and that's something that I think that a lot of women don't realize. It's something that we don't talk about. It's something that we don't share because it's not pretty, and it's not neat, and it's not clean. It's not happy. You know, having a baby and holding it, that's happy. Having a loss, it just leaves us whole. And I think that's true whether or not you've lost a pregnancy or lost a child, or even you have that hole of not having children, if that's what, you were wanting. I mean, not everybody wants children. I understand that.
But I love how this anthology really encapsulates so many different writers and their styles. And when Ben gave us this directive of choosing a verse, some of these stories that came out of this anthology, I had no idea they were going to go that way.
Mm-hmm.
So, and
Very much so.
you were thinking, okay, you think on the surface, a time to love. We automatically would go toward romantic love. We would go toward maybe familial love, but you chose a different path, which definitely really amped up the emotional reaction to your story, because you do write with a lot of sensitivity, Cathy, and you write with a lot of depth. You don't just slide over these emotions. You let us, through our characters, feel what they are feeling. And in this regard, Karis is waiting for her husband to return. She's waiting for her son to return. And while she's waiting, the most interesting thing happens. So what's that?
She finds out why there's a portal there to begin with, because it's a passageway.
But it's not necessarily a passageway for humans.
No, it is not. It's a passageway for griffins. So. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And the griffin angle in here, dear listener, I cannot tell you what that angle is. You're just going to have to pick up your copy of A Time for Everything, which is a speculative fiction anthology inspired by the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 3. Go ahead, go online, get it today. Now, if you like books that are thick and massive tome, you definitely want to pick up either the paperback copy or the hard copy, because they make wonderful gifts to people who like to read a variety of stories, and they make a good gift for you. Let's say you're on a long flight on a plane or something. Pick up A Time for Everything. By the time you finish, you're going to have time for everything to go ahead and pick it up. Now, Cathy, I want to thank you for being with me on the show today. I didn't want to do too much into your story, but just the excitement that's going on with this anthology. All of us in the group were just overwhelmed by this idea. And this idea really, for me, it made me want to dig deeper into the Word of God. And it really made me want to go into this thing with the understanding that why was this little poem written that has lasted through the eons of time and man? And each couplet represents something about the human experience. Like the first verse is a time to be born, and the exact opposite is a time to die. And then from there, as Ben so eloquently tells us, we have all these things that humans deal with: a time to gather stones, a time to scatter stones, a time to tear, a time to mend. All these things gather together. And why do you think these verses, even the people who are not believers, resonate with them so much?
I think it's because it captures everything that we do. In between that first couplet of a time to be born and a time to die, and the next verses go into every experience that we have. It, a time for war and a time for peace. And because it might not be pretty, but there is a time for both. There is a time for tearing and a time for mending, a time for mourning and a time for dancing. And I think it just captures the I can spell the word, but I can't say it. I'll just say opposites. It's not what the word I'm thinking of. I'm thinking it's longer. But I'm going to mispronounce it because it's one of those words. It's a mark that I read more than I
Right.
Mm-hmm. But the opposite extremes of mourning and dancing, for example. We need to be called into a community where we can connect with each other and we can support each other in the mourning, in the dancing, in the born, in being born, in dying, in mending and tearing. And when we are connected together in that community, it's just, it makes us feel whole. It makes us feel seen, because we might be in one season, but another season is coming.
Exactly. And when that season comes, we have to experience that season like the other ones before it. I remember, and most of my listeners know how devastated I was when my grandmother passed away. Mm-hmm. And I never thought, and around the same time, your sister passed away too, Cathy, because we were comforting each other. And yes. I never thought I would have to live a life without her.
Yeah.
Never thought that would happen. And to find out that I had to, though, because, and this is going to sound very strange, dear listener, there are certain things death teaches us that life can't.
Yes.
Isn't that crazy? It's just like the Lord knows what he's doing. There are certain things about letting go that retaining doesn't teach us. There are certain things about war that peace doesn't teach us. But here's the thing, like the writer said, there's a time for everything. And for what? Every purpose under heaven. So, dear listener, if you want to find out what some of these times are, pick up your copy of A Time for Everything, a speculative fiction anthology inspired by Ecclesiastes chapter 3, edited by Ben Avery from Upward and Onward Media. Make sure you go ahead and pick it up today. Cathy, thank you so much for being with me for this very short discussion about your short story. Cannot wait to have you back and have you back real soon.
Thanks. It's as always, it's a joy to be here and talk with you, Parker. Thank you for having me.
And dear listener, we'll be back next time with another guest talking about their story in this wonderful anthology, A Time for Everything. See you later. Bye.